in particular Claude Code. So that's the command line interface aspect of Claude, which I do want to get into.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a bit of something you got to think about, and it doesn't come naturally to people, but it is super powerful. And as I've spent the last couple of days playing around, it the way my business partner Ethan Malik says it's we now all have agents on our computer in a very quick and easy way, quick and dirty way, if you
Yeah.
will. I think all the stuff that we think of as a great coding agent is still great. I ginned up a website. It did a really good job. It was a fairly complex idea I had for like an essay site, but it brought you on these learning journeys, and there was like trying to dynamically shift the space where the essay is so that and I had a lot of strong opinions about typography and stuff, and it just was great. It like did a really good job as far as I can tell. So far it's worked really well, but it's more than that. It's more powerful than just coding.
Yeah, you were telling me you use it for all these different things. I'm like, why would you use a coding tool for that?
Yeah, so all right, I'll get a little technical for a minute, and I am not technical. I
Okay.
don't know how to code. So but probably a lot of people at least know what a command line interface is, but it's like on a Mac, which is what I use. You open the program terminal, and it's this kind of intimidating looking bunch of letters, and or PCs have them. Linux is basically built around command line interfaces. It's basically you type instead of having a graphic interface, and you can install a program called Claude Code in your command line interface. If you want to know how, just go to Claude and say, how do I install Claude Code
Yeah.
on my command line interface? Here's the kind of computer I have. And then you open it up, and essentially it's a chat window within that terminal. And that terminal, you open it up within a particular folder. So what I did yesterday, I have a massive downloads folder. I basically am terrible at organizing my files,
Oh,
and
me too.
I download so much junk.
Yeah.
And so I just opened within the downloads folder in the command line. Again, you just tell Claude you want to do this, or you just, dump a recording of this podcast and it'll just tell you how to do it. And I said, look around this folder and tell me what's there and suggest things I could delete. And it went through and it said, oh, you have these images, like apps that downloaded as an image to install the app. I think you could delete those. You have a bunch of redundant files. You have, anyway, it went from 29 gigs to 15 gigs like that. And I set it to ask me permission, but you can ask it to just go on its own. So got rid of like half the dead weight. Then I said, now go through and try and come up with an organizational scheme. And I actually didn't tell it anything about what these files were or who I am. And it came up with a really good organizational scheme. It said, all right, it seems like you're interested in these topics. It seems like you have some client work. It seems like you have some personal family stuff. What about this scheme? And I made a few small changes, but basically said yes. And now it just fully organized all of my files in a pretty sensible folder. You could do this in any folder. I've seen people do it on Google Drive. And then very easily, I can then say, now create a little program that just automatically does that once a week, once a day, whatever you want. And what's cool is when you're using Claude Code for whatever purpose. Another thing I did, I'm almost terrified to say these words just because it's such a hot, but I decided like I really need to. I lived in the Middle East for a long time, but I haven't been reporting on the Middle East for a long time, for decades. And so I want to go deep as if I was back to reporting on the Middle East. I follow news from the Middle East like anybody. And so I gathered a whole bunch of documents, a bunch of deep research on all the AI LLMs, and then a whole bunch of primary source documents. I was discussing them with Claude Code within the folders where they are. And it can create like a markdown file for you, like a text document that's tracking what you're learning, what you're thinking. It can give you a to-do list of things you want to read or do. And it was a kind of rich interaction with documents I don't think I've ever had. You could simulate a lot of that with like Claude or ChatGPT projects. I mean, it's not only in Claude Code, but there was something. It wasn't limited by context length. It just allowed me to engage these documents in a very rich way, where I was saying, what are the key arguments for this? What are the key arguments against that? What is a perspective I'm missing? And then it could make a call on the web or whatever. Um, it just it felt more like Claude was going from an app I go into and became just part of my computer operating system, and like a seamless linking of my brain and thoughts into the computer itself.
That's super
It,
interesting. Yeah, so I didn't understand before. I think that it operated within a folder. So you took all these documents you were interested in, you put them in a folder, and then you activate Claude Code in that folder. Is that right?
yeah, and that's really important because it means, like, if I have a folder called Middle East or a folder called
Mm.
personal finance or whatever, it only will work in the folder you tell it to work in. So if you have different work projects, it's not going to accidentally grab something from some other client and dump it in, or it's not, you can really segment what it has access to. Sometimes that can be annoying because you might want to um, access more, and it can only access although within that folder you can create additional folders, so you essentially can have as much memory as you want in there, and you can create this running. I mean, that's what I've found really great. It's like, create a to-do list of, and I'll just blather into it. I use Whisperflow, the
Oh, I do too.
automatic, yeah, and I'll just blather at it. Like, here's a bunch of things I'm thinking about. I want to understand it better. Give me a to-do list. Go out and research, who are people I should read, what are documents I should read, what are terms I should understand better. And then we just start constantly updating my little to-do list, and then building out my documents, and then asking it questions, etc. I do always feel the obligation to say this doesn't, and I'm certainly not arguing this replaces like spending 2 years in libraries, or and there's all the problems you can imagine. That it's certainly probably missing things. It's, we know about all the biases inherent. Um, so there are deeper, richer ways of engaging material, but I don't know that there's faster ways of going that deep that quickly. Like, I really felt like in 2 or 3 days, I got caught up on a whole bunch of really fairly specific questions about the Middle East that, I was a reporter. I know what this is like. Would have taken me months in an earlier time.
Yeah. And this particular use you're describing sounds a lot to me like Notebook LM. How do you think it's different from that?
It So in a certain sense, it's not that different. And I should say I worked with the Notebook LM team, so full disclosure, and I love Notebook LM. It's not that different in that sense, although I guess in my use case, they do have different uses. Like, it's this kind of read write capability where I'm like, and I'm feeling like, is Stephen Johnson going to yell at me for saying this? But the creator of Notebook LM, but with Notebook LM, I think of it as like, all right, here's 20 documents. I want to be able to query these. I want to be able to engage these. The way I use Claude Code in those folders, it's more like the folder is a living, I'm adding documents, I'm subtracting documents, I'm doing searches and producing new documents. So it feels less like a static bunch of documents and more like an active conversation that's changing the material with which I'm having the conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating. I'm definitely gonna play
Yeah.
with this, in the next week or 2.